Glad to be here. Hello, hello. Hello, hello, hello. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Leadership Foundation's Town Hall. My name is Cornelius Williams, and I'm the president of the Resurgence Leadership Foundation, and I am co-host with my friend Dave Hillis, the president of our global network, and we're so glad that you're with us. Today, we'll be finishing up of our fifth of our five-part series on healing a fractured world, and you're in for a treat today. We have with us our new friend, Katherine Haley of the Philanthropy Roundtable, and Dr. Justin Beene from the Grand Rapids Leadership Foundation. And so before we continue, I'm going to pray and then give us a couple of little reminders. Let's pray. Lord, we are so grateful that you've allowed us the opportunity to convene today. I'm always glad to be here. I learned so much from those who are with us and also from Dave. And so I pray that this time today would continue to be useful as we seek to partner with you in transforming our world into places of shalom. We commit this time to you in the name of Jesus. Amen. Amen. Hey, for those of you that are on Town Hall, one of the things we want to definitely encourage, this is not just the, hey, us talk at you. This is actually a conversation dialogue. And so the way that you are able to engage is through our chat. And so you can raise your hand, you can submit questions or answers or anything that you'd like to via our chat format. We have a team that is specifically paying attention to that. And so say hello, you can shout, you can say, I don't understand. You might even raise a question. Whatever you do, use the chat function, and we will make sure that we get to those questions. Before we go into our conversation today, I want to give a shout out to one of our faithful participants, my friend here, Wilt Skyhook Fighter. He went to go visit his daughter, and he was meeting with Dave. And Wilt, I just want to say, hey, thanks, bro, for just being faithful and being with us since the beginning. Dave, I actually think we're on our 30th episode. We're getting into SVU territory here, buddy.
That's right.
We're gonna have to get some shirts. And so, hey, but you all, this is the fifth of our five-part series on healing the fractured world. And last week, Dave kind of shared with us from the book of Philemon, and that conversation really stood with me over these last few days, and I've been reflecting on it. And when I think about what he was saying with where Paul was trying to get Philemon to embrace Onesimus to come back, and then several weeks ago, Dave brought up this idea of Peter with Cornelius and them being brothers, and then the story of the woman at the well. I began to go back to, man, God, what is it you've been saying? And there's been kind of a theme that has really kind of resonated with me, and it's been this theme of family. And it's really just, I can't get away from it. It's just this kind of this conversation that we've been having. The way I would frame it is, Dave has been, in our theological reflection, has been kind of having a conversation about family business. And I know on Tuesday nights, I cannot call my wife or bother her between 9 and 10 p.m. here, Eastern Standard Time, because she's watching This Is Us. And This Is Us is really just a look at how families are actually interacting in their world. And so, Dave, as I think about this family business conversation, can you say a little bit more about this idea of maybe kind of what it would take for Paul to get even Onesimus? Remember when I brought that up? How do you get someone to kind of buy into or look at this idea of considering this family again?
Yeah, well, I think, Cornelius, you're making a great insight because I do think there's this common theme that goes through the stories that you just talked about. And I would describe it at two levels. One is the prime mover of God beginning to move people from the place that they sit to become, thinking about themselves as a family member. And I think when you take a fractured world and you get away from kind of the, us versus them, and you somehow reframe it and say, this is actually a family issue, perspective changes, right? You still have to have hard conversations. You still have to kind of sit down and get to it. But it's a very different conversation when it's brother to sister, right? When it's sister to sister, when it's, brother to brother. And I think that takes place most prominently maybe in the story of Philemon, where Paul very directly ensures that Philemon understands that he has a new brother in the family. And it's as he establishes that, that then the conversation can take place moving forward. But there's a piece in that I want to maybe back up, and this will again be a little bit of my theological nerd side of me. One of the things about the Jewish, perspective is that, particularly in the Old Testament, when they thought about family, they did something quite revolutionary. In those Old Testament times, of course, family was always based on bloodline. Right? It was all about who is your father, who is your grandfather. The Jewish people come in and I think recognize the fact that is actually in some ways destructive. And so they come up with a new word to describe family, and it's mishpaha, the Hebrew word. And what mishpaha does is, while it acknowledges bloodline, it actually says that you can become family now, not just because of bloodline, but because of what you believe. And that becomes an absolute game changer, right? And so that idea of mishpaha is carried forward into the New Testament. And you can now begin to understand some of the radicalness, I think, of Jesus, of Paul, and their work, is that they are looking at society not through the lens of bloodline, right? Like, who is your mother, your father, your dad? But rather, what do we believe? And that becomes, I think, really revolutionary with regard to beginning to, I think, take on this idea of a fractured world. The other piece of it, though, and this is important, is that once Onesimus understood himself to be a brother, he still had to step in to that new reality, right? He still had to go back to Philemon and begin to go through a process of, again, what we've been talking about, moving from a fractured world to one that's reconciled. And there's probably, no better picture, I would say, Cornelius, of this than old Peter himself, right? We started this series with Peter in Acts 10. But to come full circle and look at Peter in the book of John, in the 18th and the 21st chapter, it's curious. I think most people know this story by heart, but there's a couple things that take place that I think are instructive for us, again, as we think about this idea of a fractured world and how do we move to places that are generative, right, that are healing. So the quick backdrop to this, of course, is that in John 18, we have Peter, having declared to Jesus, everybody else will forsake you, but I won't. And Jesus looks at him and says, actually, Peter, by the time the cock crows tonight, you will have denied me 3 times. Interestingly enough, in John, this takes place around a charcoal fire. Right, the people are warming themselves outside Jerusalem, and so the betrayal that takes place at this charcoal fire. Peter, of course, once the cock crows, runs out into the night, brokenhearted. Right, he can't believe that this is done. Now you fast forward to John 21. Right, Jesus has died; he's risen from the dead. And now the resurrection experiences begin to happen. And John 21 is interesting because Peter at the beginning of the chapter says, like I think a lot of us do, you know what, I'm going back to what I know I can do well. He's going to go fish. So he gets out in the boat with the disciples. He has caught nothing. And all of a sudden, a figure from the shore, standing by a fire, says, have you caught anything? Which, of course, is the worst question to ask a fisher person who hasn't caught any fish. They say no, and then he gives this really interesting bit of wisdom. He says, well, just throw your net on the other side of the boat, as if somehow the fish were just kind of coming up halfway to the boat. Throws the net in, right? The net is overwhelmed with 157 fish. Peter knows something is afoot. The disciple John says it's the Lord. And then Peter does something that I think is borderline humorous. It says that he puts on his cloak and jumps into the water and begins to swim ashore. Now, if anybody has ever been caught doing something wrong, you know exactly what this is about, right? Which is to say, I'm going to get to Jesus first, and I'm going to tell the story from my side. And it would probably go something like this. You know, Jesus, these guys are coming up behind me on the boat. They're going to tell you that I denied you 3 times. Best as I can tell, maybe 1.5 times, but nothing more than that. But what Peter is, of course, anticipating is that he is going to get this cosmic finger that's going to scold him, right?
Yep.
Never again. And then something magical happens. I think it's the only way you can describe it. The first thing that Jesus does is he says, I've got some bread here. Why don't you give me a fish and let's have breakfast together? I think the grace of that story, right? The being brought in, you know, to the loving embrace of who Jesus is the beginning of this fractured world, right? Beginning to get healed. And then there is a real restoration that takes place, right? You remember now, Peter, you know, is walking with Jesus, and Jesus 3 different times says to him, you know, do you love me? Well, then go feed my fish, which again is important here because it means it's still a familial issue, right? It's my sheep. I mean, they're a part of my family. The Greek language here is instructive for us because, of course, you know, in the Greek language, there's 4 words for the word love. And so if you dive into this story, what happens is that Jesus first says, Peter, do you agape me? And Peter responds the first time and says, I phileo you. In other words, I can't love you the way you're asking me to, but I do view you as my friend, my brother. Jesus the second time says, do you agape me? Peter comes back and says, I phileo you. And then again, something really, I think, quite radical takes place. And you expect Jesus to keep the high bar up, right? It's all about agape. With the third time around, Jesus lowers and says, Peter, do you phileo me? And now Peter is able to say, yes, Lord, I phileo you. In other words, Jesus appears to lower the standard in order for Peter to become restored. And I take that, you know, Cornelius, to say that I think one of the big issues in this fractured world in which we are living in, we walk into it and we all have a sense of this notion that we've got this high bar, right? That we've got this sort of standard that we've got to get to. And unless, Cornelius, you can get to my standard, there's no healing to be done, right? Unless I can get this group to understand, you know, what I'm about, we can't move any further. And I say this to leadership foundations. I think that we've got to be the group that goes in after saying agape, to move to a place of saying, but can we phileo each other? And begin to start the rebuilding, right, of this fractured world in which we're living in. So forgive me for kind of going on maybe a little bit too long, but that, I think, really begins to explain then how Philemon, you know, how the woman at the well, and ultimately here Peter begins to understand what it means to heal a fractured world.
Okay, so, you know, man, bro, Dave. Okay, so that's a lot. And so, one of the things that you challenged us, you spoke to us and said, hey, man, we need to come down and be, hey, brother, sister, sister. There are a couple of things. And again, I'm not even going to worry about those who are not, we talk about this idea of bringing together those of good faith and goodwill. And again, today I just sit as this is a family conversation, like table talk, like, hey, when we sit down at the table. And so, man, look, one of the things you challenged me, Corn, hey, will you help someone that betrayed you have success? I mean, look, I'm not even sure I'm there, Dave. I'm not even sure I'm on the shore saying, hey, bro, do this so that you can thrive. So two, then you said, hey, do I have the courage to welcome somebody that betrayed me? So let me go ahead. And then three, do I have the courage as a betrayer to go to that person that is, like you said, is going to point the finger, which, again, Dave, that's like you're saying to a miss, say, bro, you have to trust that if you are your new identity in me in Christ, brother to brother, that they will live that way. And so as you, Dave, as we think about this, and again, I'm good for asking these little crazy, like I'm trying to figure it out questions. But man, Dave, what do you say to the people who are having issues with trust? I'm not convinced that this is going to work. I've seen people before try it. It doesn't work. I just had a conversation with someone the other day, black, white, boom, boom. Man, they just, BLM and everything else, they just fractured. And Dave, these are people that profess to be followers of Jesus. This ain't family, non-family. This partisanship, no, I'm good. And so what can you say to us that you challenge us as Leadership Foundation to, hey, be those people to try to facilitate this, but what if we're struggling with whether or not we trust that it works? What would you say to us, Dave? And I know that's a long-winded question, but man, it's for real, bro. This is where the rubber hits the road, bro, for real.
Well, this is why we have Katherine on later on. So we can ask her this question, right? She can give us the answer. I mean, there's just really no other way to say what I think you've already said, Cornelius, which is this. One, a deep inventory of my own life and the recognition that I am that betrayer. That's, I think, the only door by which to have this honest conversation. I think the second piece of that, again, then is to, know and understand that Jesus actually did, restore you, right? So to move from having been revealed, I think, to be this betrayer to now being restored. And I think then, interestingly enough, is to continue to be reminded that that's where you speak from. So it doesn't allow you to, I think, get, as some people would say, catch airs, right? Think that somehow you have, walked through something and it's behind you now. I think the notion for me, and I think, again, Leadership Foundation work is at its best when we are perpetually working out of this place that we have, been, those people that have broken things. And that God has somehow, in God's merciful and gracious way, restored us. And now we have a chance to give that away to broken cities. So.
Okay, y'all, I'm fortunate enough, I get to hang out with Dave, and I'm going to pick his brain some more about this. But I would pause. Maybe you're like me, you're curious, even a little suspicious. I'll be very honest and say sometimes felt like in family business, I've been sold something only to be sold something by people who aren't willing to adhere to it, which, is hypocrisy. But I really want to lean in and be who the Lord wants us to be. Maybe there's questions you might have for Dave. I definitely want to say, hey, drop them in the chat. And, you know, whether we may not be able to get to them, but hey, we will curate those questions and maybe we can ask them later today. We can at least get them back to Dave so we can continue this conversation, because we do really want to be agents of healing. And as Peter Weiner said last week, we want to choose that. We want to choose to reconcile and be ministers of reconciliation. And so, so thank you, Dave. Y'all, one of the things we always try to do is, as we're trying to go from battlegrounds to playgrounds, trying to look at being agents of healing, of shalom, peace in this fractured world, we try to bring people to help us to think about that. And today we're in for a treat. Our friend, you know, I just met her last week, and it was just a sweet conversation, just a wonderful person. Katherine Haley, she's the Vice President of Programs for the Philanthropy Roundtable. She joined that organization like in 2016, and prior to that, she served as a Senior Director of K through 12 Education Program. Not only has Katherine actually been serving in that capacity, but prior to that, she spent 13 years working for members of the U.S. House of Representatives and the Senate, kind of trying to advance the policies that will lead to kind of human flourishing, which is really dope, you know, Katherine, and that is my term. That's really good. That's really exciting. She served for 7 years as the Chief Policy Advisor for Education, Workforce, and Anti-Poverty, Global Health, and other social issues for former Speaker of the House, John Boehner. And so I am so glad, Katherine, especially as we look at trying to heal a fractured world, that you bring such a wealth of experience to us to help us continue our conversation. But why don't we start here, though, Katherine? Why don't you kind of explain to our network kind of what, you know, the Philanthropy Roundtable is and what you all do? Now, hold on, Katherine, you're on mute now. You know, you got to come off mute now. Come on.
I apologize. Thank you so much, Cornelius and Dave. First of all, what an incredible devotion that we just had about reconciliation and building bridges and forgiveness. We have an incredible creator who every day extends new mercies. And it's to thank you for that introduction to our morning. Cornelius and Dave and Jonathan and the rest of the Leadership Foundation, thank you all for inviting me. On behalf of my colleagues at the Philanthropy Roundtable, we are certainly grateful for this time to be together. Cornelius, you asked me, what is the Philanthropy Roundtable and what do we do? Yes. So we are an organization whose vision is to build and sustain a vibrant American philanthropic movement that strengthens our free society. And that sounds audacious and bold, but really it's using philanthropy to strengthen local communities, to advance freedom, opportunity, and personal responsibility. And we do this in a variety of different ways. We do this through our storytelling. We do this through not sharing about excellence in philanthropy and the way philanthropy really undergirds much of what civil society is and does. We also do this through defending your right to give. There's an increasing element within our society that criticizes philanthropy. A lot of attention on our bigger givers, but philanthropy is something that all of us get to do. It's the small dollar gift as well as the very significant large gift. And so we believe that everyone has a right to give in the ways that he or she chooses to the causes that they care deeply about. Then we also do a lot of community building. So bringing donors together from all parts of the country who are really committed to uplifting their communities and using their resources to advance and strengthen our free society. And then finally, my colleagues on the programs team, we identify excellence organizations that are around the country. And our goal there is really to serve as an inspiration and provide a bit of a North Star for donors that are looking to use their resources to invest. So that's a little bit about what we do. So I describe ourselves as storytellers, influencers, conveners, and we also protect your ability to give as you so choose.
Thank you.
Yeah, Katherine, that's a wonderful description, and you do well with that. So I'm curious, again, to go back to a couple of comments that Cornelius made. We've had this series around this idea of a fractured world and trying to heal it, and the image for you all as a round table, right? That, at least because I was a literature major, takes me back to King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, and this notion, right, that they all sat there together in many ways as equals. I'm curious how you build these round tables. How do you bring people together that I suspect probably have different ideas about the way things should happen? Probably at times maybe think that there's certain people that should be at the table and others that shouldn't be at the table. So as you facilitate that, what are you doing to kind of help make that happen? And maybe the second part of the question is, what kind of keeps you up at night when you think about trying to bring these tables together?
Thank you so much, Dave. As far as a roundtable and bringing individuals together, we do that in a variety of ways. Certainly individuals that have a very specific focus on an issue, whether it's education or mental health, individuals that are thinking about freedom and liberty as it pertains to public policy. As we get to know our members and sort of the broader supporters in our community, we're constantly listening and trying to elevate issues that would really appeal to them. And we do that in different ways. Prior to COVID, we did a lot of in-person gatherings. So it might be, let's all gather together for a meal, and let's figure out how we collectively in our community can use our resources to address education-related issues. Or let's gather for a meal because we're really disheartened about mental health-related issues. And so bringing people together in various forums, we're doing that in a far more virtual context now, as well as through webinars. And so that is the way we do it, but it's really about knowing our membership and knowing what's of interest to them, and then curating experiences for them so that they can learn from one another, share with one another, wrestle together, and then possibly co-invest together. We have a couple of working groups, one that has been around for a couple of years, that is really trying to create a renaissance within the Catholic education space. So reviving our Catholic schools. And those donors are wrestling with, the financial model, like how, if we have a commitment to serving low-income students, how do we do that? Are there private options or public options that we can leverage? How do you ensure real continued rigor in conjunction with the beauty of the character formation that comes with being in a faith-based learning environment? But also, how do you build strong talent pipelines? So in that particular context, we have donors from across the country that are wrestling with very specific issues. As far as what's really keeping us up at night, and I appreciate you asking that, Dave, one of the issues that the roundtable I mentioned earlier, one of our pillars is to defend your right to give. There's an increasing effort to restrict individuals' ability to give, and that's through certainly their foundations. There's the efforts at the state level, and we hear every so often at the federal level efforts to dictate to foundations who serves on boards. And we feel pretty strongly that either the individual wealth creator or the family that created the wealth that establishes the foundation, they should be able to set that prerogative and not some outside, whether it's a bureaucrat or a policymaker. We really feel that those resources that have been earned should be then deployed in the ways that those wealth creators valued. But then also things around donor advised funds. You might be familiar with donor advised funds. They're a giving vehicle. This is an area where individuals are really drawing a lot of attention to it with the goal of either using various lists to censor abilities individuals' ability to direct dollars to the causes that they really care about. We've heard about this in the faith-based context, where individuals have wanted to use their donor-advised funds to support a faith-based organization, but it has been identified as a hate group because of their view on faith, family, and marriage. And that's concerning to us. And so under our policy and government affairs efforts, they're working very hard in all 50 states, as well as at the federal government, to make sure that all of you have the ability to give in the ways that you so choose. So those are, so I answered two of your questions, Dave. One is, how do we bring people together? And it's really listening and curating and sort of gathering individuals together on topics that are important to them. And then things that are keeping us up all night, it's around that philanthropic freedom is something very top of mind. But there's also other issues around education, workforce. How do we ensure we have an economically mobile and community? Issues around free speech are also top of mind.
You know, Katherine, real quickly, and then Cornelius, I'll let you have another question. But so when you begin to talk about this idea that there's maybe a policy, right, that you in your group, you know, have pretty strong convictions about, how do you pursue that without demonizing the other side? You know, what perspective or what tools maybe have you learned to be able to, you know, forcefully enter into a conversation where you have some very strong convictions, but without, right, looking at the other side as though they're, you know, somehow
the enemy.
The enemy.
Yes, that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
I think we've learned, you know, I really appreciate our leader of our organization, Elise Westhoff, and she's a real straight shooter. She'll, you know, speak straight as the things that, if she sees something is of great concern, she shares it directly, but she does it with compassion. And I think that is when we're thinking about defending one's ability to give in the ways that they so choose without various mandates. We certainly use the tools of message testing and focus groups. But at the end of the day, when it comes to philanthropic freedom, that's something that all of us should care about. The resources, whether it's a $50 gift to your local church, or to leadership foundations, or to a public policy organization, or your local charity, everybody should be able to have that freedom. And so when we talk about sort of that philanthropic freedom, your ability to give without sort of the constraints of government or mandates of the government, we really use specific examples that would appeal to the individual that might say, oh, well, in the name of sort of democratizing philanthropy, you know, we bring it back and say, well, what motivates you? If you care a lot about, you know, your local homeless shelter, well, you should be able to give to that organization. And if it's a faith-based organization, absolutely, you should be able to make that strategic investment. If you care deeply about creating educational options for families, well, they should be able to do that as well. And if individuals, this is another issue about privacy, there is an effort to sort of in the name of transparency, sort of direct nonprofits or donor advised funds to disclose where individuals are making their investments. And how we've seen that, unfortunately, there is a lawsuit that's pending before the Supreme Court where we have seen individuals in the name of transparency where those gifts have been sort of made available, is that it's been actually used as a shaming technique where individuals have lost their jobs. We saw this prominently during the Proposition 8 case, which was the marriage, individuals that were defending traditional marriage between a man and woman in California, individuals that, where it was disclosed later that they had made strategic investments in defense of that proposition, later lost their jobs. And our position is that if you choose to give anonymously, please do, and we'll defend your right to give in an anonymous way. And you might choose to do that in for a variety of reasons. That might include You just don't want individuals to know where you're giving, or you might not want individuals to know that you have a significant amount of means. Or you want to demonstrate a certain level of humility, or your gift might be perceived as controversial. And so we believe that while transparency is really, really important, your ability to give freely and anonymously should also be defended. So, but to answer your question, Dave, it's really understanding your audience, but also defending your principles at the same time.
Yeah, very good.
Thank you. Not easy work, but thank y'all for waking up, doing that work. Katherine, you said and you described your work as we identify excellence. We identify excellence. You know, I'm one of 45 Leadership Foundation presidents that are on this call. There's other board members that are on this call, and we're all in the business of trying to be excellent in our service to cities. And so on behalf of the network, as I discussed with you last week, I'd love for you to kind of say, hey, as I'm out there having conversations with the philanthropic community, and as I'm looking at excellence, hey, here's a couple of things that I can see where things are trending, so that we can kind of begin to prepare ourselves or consider how we can continue the work that the Lord has called us to do as we think about engaging the philanthropic community. So any advice? I'm really saying, hey, Katherine, what are you seeing? Give us some advice. Love to hear from you.
I think, Cornelius, thank you for that question. As far as what we're seeing across the country and what donors are really interested in and how they're trying to commit to serving and uplifting their community. First of all, as many of you know, COVID has just ravished communities all around the world, and that's all of you on this call. And I have no doubt that you all are stepping in to provide that shoulder to lean on. And so we are seeing, first, I would say donors this year have been incredibly generous. They have really opened their pocketbooks in a way that I think individuals hadn't quite predicted. They've also sort of, for those that give out of a foundation capacity, they've often, instead of for very specific reasons, they've sort of changed their policy to give general operating support. And that has been really incredible to see. I think long-term is, how do you partner with individuals to help them if they are perhaps in an economically fragile situation, how do you help them sort of enter into that transition from fragility to sort of prosperity? So it's identifying the local resources within your community that can help individuals make that transition, whether it's through job training or helping individuals, like whether it's through your local community college. There's a number of community colleges across the United States that have really looked to a more credentialing model to help individuals in a very short amount of time take the skills that they have, upskill, and jump into whatever that next vocational opportunity is. In the space of education, my gosh, so many schools across the country have closed their doors. And for those that are currently open, they will close again, likely due to the rise in COVID cases. So how can you all come along those families to help ensure that their children really are in a safe learning environment, they have access to technology, they have the community support? We have noticed at the beginning of COVID, we had a number of individuals that contributed to local community funds that enabled the release of, whether it's hotspots or technology, computers, et cetera. But we're seeing now is philanthropy being used to support actually sort of local learning pods, not just for the haves, the individuals with means, but like my church at the Falls Church Anglican, we've partnered with a local organization called Comunidad, and the narthex of our church is now a learning space for kids in Fairfax County. And that's for families that are on the front line. They have to work in order to be able to put food on the table or pay rent or a mortgage. But those students now have a safe environment with high-speed internet, and they're also in community. So there's ways that I think where community foundations can play, or the leadership foundations all across the world can play, is really that sense of neighborliness, understanding who is your neighbor and how do you extend, yes, that peace, that shalom, but also that space of hospitality and serving as a connector, using your networks to connect individuals that might be in those fragile spaces to those other opportunities.
Good.
Wonderful, wonderful. I think we have time for one more question. And Carrie, are you? Yep, here you are.
Katherine, really appreciate this reflection, and we've had some really good comments and questions coming in. I know we're tight on time, so only can get to one of them. But wondering, Leadership Foundations often is operating in the role of an intermediary in cities around the world. And so wondering how you might speak to the role that intermediaries play in the philanthropy world, and how that interacts with your work.
Thanks, Carrie, for that question. I think Bill Milliken has used this term, this idea of a router. Communities and schools often serves in that capacity. And that's how I think of all of you. And you understand the local churches in your community. You understand sort of those emergency service providers, but you also have great networks with employers, business people, individuals that you can really connect, serve as a mentor, almost like a shepherd. And so, I'll give you an example of how we see this in the space of education. There's a number of community-based organizations around the country that mobilize certainly philanthropy, but they're also elevating local leaders that have innovative school models that they're trying to embed within the community. So they're identifying talent who might have a really great idea for a school. They're helping to shepherd that individual as they design their plan, and then they help them with that community engagement of bringing in students. But then they're also addressing the talent pipeline. So partnering with local teacher organizations or bringing in high-performing teacher talent. And so I feel like, and then they're able to help those local leaders identify the public dollars as well as philanthropic dollars to help launch their new schools. And that might be in the charter capacity or the private space. And so when I think about all of you, and I think of the role that you all play, you get to serve in that. You understand the local landscape in a really great way. You know what the emergency needs are of your community, but then you also can identify the long-term needs, and you can connect those that are really excellent in their provision. You can connect those individuals together. And I think in the end, you can really create a vibrant ecosystem.
Katherine, that was an elegant way to describe, I think, Leadership Foundations, and so thank you for that. With that, we'd love to move on here and bring up somebody that I have a deep appreciation for. I had a chance to meet Dr. Justin Beene probably, now must be 6 or 7 years ago, and it was initially through Joel Van Dyke, where Justin had done an internship with the Leadership Foundation that was developing in Guatemala City. He returned from there and then set up a Leadership Foundation in Grand Rapids. One of the things that I would just say about Justin, in the midst of his really remarkable talent, is that he has got the gift of the entrepreneur. And I've spent time with Justin in Grand Rapids, and it is a sight to behold all the different ways that he is working in Grand Rapids, connecting, coming up with new creative ideas. So with that, Justin, it is great to have you, and we would love to have you maybe describe here right out of the gate a bit about your Leadership Foundation in Grand Rapids.
Yeah, well, good to be here, Dave. It's good to see you again, as well as many other friends along the journey. Yeah, you know, I mean, it's interesting to be kind of on the conversation of philanthropy, and I don't know if you strategically set that up. Grand Rapids happens to be contextually, you know, one of the most philanthropic communities in the country, according to Forbes, kind of year after year, usually in the top 10. So it's a very unique mid-sized city, and yet, you know, it has its own challenges. You have the you know, headquarters of the Christian Reformed Church, the Reformed Church of America. You have lots of publishing houses, you know, Zondervan and Kriegel and Baker. And so many of you have probably read books that were published out of Grand Rapids. 800 churches, almost 3,000 nonprofits. And yet you have this kind of tale of two cities, and that there's a 1 mile kind of radius in the city in which 85% of the Black population lives, who are poor, according to Forbes 2015. Said Grand Rapids is the second worst city for African Americans to live in terms of economics. And so for us, it was really looking at, you know, how do you have this dichotomy of realities in which, you know, you have one of the most philanthropic communities in the country, one of the most kind of educated, you know, Christian faith-based spaces, and then the outcomes are still the second worst in terms of economics. And I think what, for me and a lot of my research and living here, born and raised, is that the track we were on wasn't the right track. It led to nowhere. And we needed to think of some new ideas, some new injection of innovation that maybe thought a little bit different from an economic lens, because in many ways we're dealing with poverty as the main issue. And so, you know, kind of to Leadership Foundation's, you know, kind of core identity is maybe asking this question, not just what do we agree upon, what do we believe in, but also, you know, what do we care about? And so for us, it was saying, what would it look like if we took, you know, a church and a nonprofit and some for-profits, and we collectively decided to do something different, to create a new type of platform in which we maybe hung on to our own identities, but submitted to a larger vision that was bigger than ourselves and required us to think a bit transformatively. And so our Leadership Foundations is comprised of a global historical white institution, Bethany Christian University, and all of their youth and community programs are in our building, along with the NAACP. The Grand Rapids chapter of the NAACP is a core partner in our Leadership Foundations. Then we have a church-based group that started from a local church in our neighborhood called the Grand Rapids Nehemiah Project, and I believe our executive director, Melita, is on this call. And then we have two social businesses. We have a landscape and construction company that we started called Building Bridges that's hiring folks from the neighborhood and profit sharing with them. We have a restaurant and coffee shop. And so we've been trying to create a new way in many ways in which philanthropy can give to, right? To say, how do we leverage philanthropy for economic benefit? And how do we use new business models, new business innovation to create sustainability, to really fast forward this idea of not just poverty alleviation, but what does it look like for wealth creation, which for me is one of the key factors that we're dealing with.
Well, first of all, man, Justin, I just want to say, preach, bro. You know, there's a verse, Proverbs 13, and the reason I say this, I was in a conversation last week. You know, the verse Proverbs says, the wealth of the wicked is stored up for the righteous, right? But just because it's stored up doesn't mean they're accessing it, right? So how do we create access to that hidden door that's in plain sight? And so I love what you're kind of saying there. Is there anything that you have been, you know, there in Grand Rapids, you've kind of like, hey, there's this idea of creating this new model. Can you kind of share what that may look like, boots on ground? You know, like, hey, from concept to, you know, practice, you know, what it looks.
Yeah, I mean, I think.
Because I want to hear, because I want to learn.
And the interesting thing is, like, we were in the middle of a capital campaign. and COVID hit. And it was like, you know, we shut down our restaurant. We had to, you know, lay off 30 of our landscaping and construction employees. And it's a $4.5 million campaign. And, you know, this whole time we've been trying to convince people like that the partnership was real, that it was authentic, that we were working together, that we were more about the serving of the community and creating wealth generating opportunities than we were about holding on to our ideologies. And I think, you know, it was taking a lot of work to get people to buy into this thing. And then COVID hit, and then kind of the racial unrest, and it was almost like people started listening, right? People started saying, well, what are the new ideas? We've been seeing a lot of, you know, what I would say is philanthropy fatigue, where it's like, and maybe we have been giving to the same thing. Maybe we have been giving to the same, you know, Band-Aid type solutions. Well, what else is out there? And so, you know, I mean, we're now, I think when we kind of did our public launch 2 years ago, we had only had about $850,000. Today we've secured 4.2 million.
Come on.
And that is both sides of the spectrum. I mean, that is extremely conservative Christian foundations, and that's the local community foundation, that's progressive companies, that's corporations, that's individuals, a whole spectrum of people who have said, actually, this appears to be something that is real and can be transformative. So, I mean, we do everything. We have a GED program. We have a construction training program. We train young people in hospitality and food service. We see about 500 young people per year, part of the Global Mentoring Initiative with LF. We partner with housing developers and manage 23 affordable units of housing for previously homeless youth. Landscaping and construction projects, you know, both residential and commercial projects with the city, with the county, with developers. And part of the campaign is that we've now purchased a previously abandoned 33,000 square foot building in the middle of the city. And so we're building a LEED certified commercial kitchen that will be about 2,200 square feet. That will be an opportunity for food entrepreneurs to come into the space as a cloud kitchen, but also to serve. We have an event space that will hold now 350 people, as well as outside seating. We're putting on a green roof that will have a rooftop deck. So more revenue generating activities that is going to give people a reason to be a part of this community. We've always said we want the millionaire and the marginalized to both feel equally at home. And so what that means is giving people a reason to come and be here, not maybe just to give, but also to receive.
Well, Justin, just because I've had a chance to be with you, no surprise here, but I hope everyone's had a chance just to get a taste of the spectacular innovation that is flowing through you and your Leadership Foundation work. We're pressed for time here, but we'd love to just end, Justin, with how can we be praying for you as a network?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the reality is that, you know, people are tired. I mean, this season has been traumatizing for everybody, for every family. And the work that we're doing is tough work. It's very tough work. It's very complicated work, seeing the pain. And so, you know, I think my prayer, and hopefully the prayers for us is, and for all of us, is to maybe not just make it better, but that it count for something, right? That all of this trauma, you know, help us become more human, help us become more alive, more like the person of Jesus. So that is my prayer.
Boy, that is the prayer. That isn't just a prayer. So again, thank you for that, Justin. Well, with that, I know we're pushed up against our time here, but we want to bring Eric Geary on. Eric, I think as everybody knows, is been leading the COVID-19 Activation Fund. So Eric, if you could give us a quick update.
Yeah, thank you. If you ever have to step up to bat after anybody, you know, that's just hit a home run, you're just kind of, can I get gonna get a bat on it. So well done, team today, Dave and Corn, Katherine and Justin. It's fantastic. So I do want to give a quick activation fund update. As everybody knows, when COVID struck, the Leadership Foundation Network in its particular way responded incredibly. Justin's been relaying some of those ways there in Grand Rapids, but the reality we understood was that all of us, in one way or another, were turning our attention toward relief, rebuilding, and rehabilitating the places and spaces we love and care for. So I want to say thank you to those who filled out the most recent survey. We've asked you to do that 3 times now. What we're trying to do when we collect that information is aggregate the total impact that we've had from Leadership Foundations. One of the beauties of our network is that we all do very creative, innovative things in our cities. We believe cities are living, breathing organisms, their own set of assets, their own set of deficiencies, and we're responding in that. So what that can look like is a really broad scope of work. But when we focus our attention on any one thing together, it's a very powerful demonstration of our delivery network. Something like was mentioned just earlier from Justin, the Mentoring to Thrive initiative in our U.S. cities around mentoring is one of those. When you see the scale of Leadership Foundations, when things are aggregated in such a way, it's incredibly powerful. And so that's why we've been trying to gain access to that information, even if it's a little iterative and it's similar to what you presented the last time. We do still have some folks, if you all could get those in, it would be very, very helpful to us. You know, Justin mentioned something that's also hit us all very hard in our data collection from Jonathan Hayden at CCIC is showing us a little bit of that. So in fact, across the LF network, 44 staff were laid off, 76 staff members with reduced hours, a 22% reduction in operating reserves throughout the network, a significant reduction in government funding and corporate funding. And I only mention that not to share just the bad news, but just to say the incredible resolve and resiliency from those of you who are on the ground in cities, seeing them move from battlegrounds to playgrounds is just, to use one of Dave's words, breathtaking. So in the midst of all of that, you know, we've served in our relief efforts almost 2.7 million meals around the world to folks who needed food. That's a value of $5 million in food relief. $500,000 right at it in supplies donated from around the network in all forms. And what was just kind of just almost shocking to me is when you total that, what we've activated across the network in supplies, in kind, donations, grants received, food and relief is a little over $11 million of relief efforts in our cities. And so Corn's pretty good at applauding, but I'm gonna give us all of us on the call. Come on, Corn, give me one. I know Justin was getting it all, man. You gotta save one for me.
My bad, bro. My bad,
but it
bro.
is actually pretty incredible. And that is the power of the delivery network that we have in our cities in a really profound way. So I want to say, stay encouraged in the midst of this. Let's continue to look for new wineskins, like Justin was saying. Let's continue to engage the philanthropic community, moving into rebuild and rehabilitate. We have, we're in the same place financially on the activation fund, having distributed a little more than $250,000 to the network, raising about $750,000 that we will be able to activate as we move on. So we're in a good spot, and I'm very encouraged by what's going on in our network. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Corn.
Well done, bro.
You bet, Eric. Thank you very much. Jonathan, some announcements?
Yeah, just a couple here, Dave. I just wanted to mention you can see all of the rich content from today from Katherine and Justin. If you missed anything, you can check that out. The video will be up today on the Streetlights blog on leadershipfoundations.org, and you can watch the entire series again. We've had so many good guests and local leadership foundations sharing the excellent work they're doing. I wanted to mention a couple things here. The new podcast is out. You can also check that out on the Streetlights blog on forgiveness and the art of collaboration. It's a great conversation with Rachel McPherson. Giving Tuesday is coming up on December 1. We wanted to make sure that everybody kind of save the date for the Global Day of Giving and kind of help us celebrate how we can bring healing and lasting change to fragmented world and cities. So make sure to save that date. This is again, the last in this series of town halls. We will be coming back on December 18th for a special Advent season town hall on prayer and poetry, which should be really fun. And then we'll come back again in the new year with the new series that we're hard at work planning right now. That's it from here. I know we've got John Okamoto to close us in prayer. LF board member.
Hello all. Will you join me in prayer? Thank you, Lord, for today's program, for Katherine, for Justin, for their good work in closing out our series on healing a fractured world. We ask you to bless their work. While this town hall series closes, we lament that the wounds of our world are so deep and so many. We ask, how long, Lord? But in our lament, we thank you for the strength and inspiration you give. We thank you for this family of faith. Give us courage, grace, and persistence to enter into the fractured breaches, so evident, with humility and wisdom as we bind the wounds of our world, and as Justin asked, make our work count. Dismiss us with your blessing, we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.